Hello, my name is Alex Flores from Las Perlas del Mar. Last March 8, we attended the emergency community meeting, the Shelter Sanctuary Status Campaign. Invited shelters workers, residents, managers, counselors, and anti-violence against women advocates and activists to attend an urgent community meeting. The women say, out of our shelters, out of our lives, to the Canada Border Services Agency. Stay with us and find out more about it.
Women's organizations, anti-violence against women's services, rape crisis centers from across the city are gathering today to strategize on how we can effectively keep immigration enforcement out of our sites, out of our shelters, out of our spaces. We are organizing to continue pressure on the Canada Border Services Agency to make them issue a statement agreeing to not violate the safe space of a shelter. A statement acknowledging that what they did last week and what they've been doing for months now, invading the safe spaces of women's shelters, is wrong and unacceptable, and apologize and say that they will not do this again.
I'm here today as part of a campaign, the Shelter Sanctuary Status Campaign, and we've recently learned that Canada Border Service agents have entered, on February 27th, entered a women's shelter called Beatrice House here in Toronto to try to arrest a woman, a Ghanaian woman, known only as Jane. They wanted to arrest her and her family and hold them for deportation back to Ghana, where she was fleeing Ghana, has been fleeing Ghana due to violence she experienced there. This is a huge concern for women's activists, should be a concern for everyone in Canada, to have a national policy that says that agents of the state can come into refuges, into safe spaces where women are escaping violence in order to arrest them and deport them. Deportation itself is a form of violence against women when it uproots families and tears them apart. Forced migration of women back to situations where they could be subject to extreme violence and death, as well as the notion that CBSA would come into a shelter means that many, many women who need to be protected from their abuser will not use the services that are there to protect us from our abusers. Instead, they will be driven underground, in many cases driven back into the arms of the abuser because it will feel safer to be abused than to be sent back to a home country where they have no future and where they face violence. This is a policy that must be changed. This is a practice that must be stopped. And the Shelter Sanctuary Status Campaign is calling on all women's services, all social services in the city of Toronto and Ontario to refuse to cooperate with agents and to provide safe sanctuary for women, no matter what their legal status, for as long as they need to be safe from violence.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here today. I'm Faria Chaudhry, speaking on behalf of the Shelter Sanctuary Status Campaign, a growing coalition of over 120 anti-violence against women organizations across the city working to create safe spaces for all women, irrespective of immigration status. In mid-February 2010, immigration enforcement officers invaded a women's shelter in search of Jane, a single mother and survivor of violence from Ghana. Immigration raids on shelters are an absolute outrage and must end immediately. Shelters are some of the few places where women find space to piece their lives together. The threat of detention and deportations shatter any such possibility, forcing women to remain in hiding. The Canada Border Services Agency actions will force women living in abusive or dangerous situations to stay in them because they are afraid that their shelters might be raided. This is entrenching systematic abuse against non-status women who are already unable to access health care, food banks, education, or a decent job, and it is utterly unfair. Today we have representatives from anti-violence against women organizations from across the city, including but not limited to women's shelters, rape crisis centers, women drop-in centers, legal organizations, and other anti-violence against women organizations to speak on this alarming new rising issue. We are gathered here because we need this to stop. Immigration enforcement has no place in our shelter system or in our lives. morning's newspaper tells us that the Canada Border Services Agency has accepted that it enters shelters. We are here today to say that their policy is wrong, is immoral and unjust, and we will not stand for it.
Women's shelters were created in Canada and around the world to help women escape from violence and oppression and to support their demands for equity in all aspects of their lives. Shelter policy to keep confidential the names of women in the shelter protects individual women from being found and stalked by abusers, but it also supports women and children who have not yet come to the shelter by reinforcing our promise that we will provide a safe and supportive space. Women have to be able to trust in that promise. When enforcement officers violate the safety of a women's shelter to execute their orders on any one woman, they send a message to other women that the shelter isn't a safe or confidential space and that the shelter may not protect them. Women who get this message may not call a women's service for help when their lives are in danger. Women without status may be escaping violence in another country or attempting to escape from a violent situation here in Canada. Without the ability to access safe shelter and community services, such as police, health, and social programs, they are made vulnerable to further violence and exploitation.
Like stop to these kinds of tactics, these increasingly violent tactics of immigration going into shelters where women are seeking safe space, which are already so limited. Like someone said earlier today, most women without status or with precarious status would not even choose to go to a shelter because of fear of being identified, all the stigma that's attached to it, all the lack of supports that might exist in terms of sort of like linguistic and cultural and other barriers. But when women are in these shelters or experiencing violence, like another thing that has to be demanded and achieved is a full and comprehensive regularization program for all women experiencing violence and an immediate end to all detentions and deportations of those women. So I think that's like the goal of the next step of that is essentially like part of the campaign, is to ensure that there are actual sanctuary spaces throughout the city for all people without status. And we're going to start step by step with Shelter Sanctuary Status Campaign.
I think it's really important to organize and take action because we're talking about people that are extremely marginalized, and if we don't stand up and say something, who's going to? We are there to support women who are escaping violence, no matter where they're from or what their immigration status is, and women without status are truly marginalized.
And in addition to that, violence against women, we have to remember, is a human rights issue. So everyone should have access to a safe space, no matter whether they have status, documented status or not. It's a human right.